Good morning, friends, and welcome to our Sunday morning meeting. This lodge meets at 11 a.m. every Sunday for the discussion of a particular topic presented by a student. Today's topic is the challenge of truth, and next week's is occult origins of the United States. The Theosophical movement has brought forward the principles of man, which is not given before that time. The three component parts which are talked about in most religions, the soul, the spirit, and the mind, actually constitutes the higher aspect of the individual that goes from life to life. The lower aspects, we leave them on earth and in Kamaloka. So the human being, once that he or she realizes the inner life, then the awakening has come to that individual. The inner life constitutes the progression of the human soul towards its perfectibility. But it cannot be stripped away from the externals. It has to come about naturally from within. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading comes from the Dhammapada. Sorry. Sorry, today's reading comes from the voice of the silence. Alas, alas, that all men should possess alaya, be one with the great soul, and that possessing it alaya should so little avail them. Behold, how like the moon, reflected in the tranquil waves, alaya is reflected by the small and by the great, is mirrored in the tiniest atoms, yet fails to reach the heart of all. Alas, that so few men should profit by the gift, the priceless boon of learning truth, the right perception of existing things, the knowledge of the non-existent. Saith the people, O teacher, what shall I do to reach to wisdom? O wise one, what to gain perfection? Search for the paths, but O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the I from the heart doctrine. Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and turpid sits, and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning, with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions. Search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancy's false suggestions. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. Shun ignorance, and likewise shun illusion. Avert thy face from world deceptions. Mistrust thy senses, they're false. But within thy body, the shrine of thy sensations, seek in the impersonal for the eternal man. And having sought him out, look inward, thou art Buddha. Now today's talk, the challenge of truth.
Thank you. Friends, the subject today, the challenge of truth, is like so many. It begs us to answer, what is truth, right? The elements of the title itself really require some understanding before we can even talk about what the challenge of truth is. We need to know what truth itself is. Another possible title of this talk could be the following. What can we learn from lies? So what can we learn from lies that tells us what the challenge is, right? Because truth becomes a word that once we define it, we realize that we're in this position of learning from things that aren't true. And how does that work? How does that play out? How is that described in the philosophy of Theosophy? What we'll find out is truth is an experience. Okay? Truth is not something abstract. It's something we actually have to go through to achieve knowledge. There's a phenomenon in psychology called the Grand Canyon effect. And it's where you can tell someone, if you've been to the Grand Canyon and then you try to describe that experience to someone, you can give them very objective evidence of how impressive it is. You can tell them how deep the canyon is. You can tell them how wide and how vast and colorful and beautiful, and how you can tell them how transcendent the experience was for you when you saw the Grand Canyon. You stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon. And the person can think that they understand. The person you're talking to can consider themselves convinced. They say, okay, it's amazing, I'm sure. Yet no one, until they actually get there, until they actually stand on the rim and see it for themselves, really understands the Grand Canyon and what that experience is like. You have to have gone through that experience yourself personally, directly, before you can really grasp the depth of it. Literally, in terms of the Grand Canyon, metaphorically, in terms of truth. To know the truth of something, to understand the profundity of a particular truth, you need to experience it yourself. It was many, many years ago, I was having a philosophical conversation with a couple of friends, one of whom was a Spanish speaker, primarily. The other was helping to translate this conversation, because these were deep ideas we were talking about. And I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I said something, and my friend translated it, and she said, "Ay, profundo." And I looked at my friend for a translation, and he said, deep. It just means deep. And this use of the word deep, meaning profound, meaning amazing and inspiring or evocative or challenging, is an idea that we'll return to from time to time throughout the talk today, in a way to try and understand what truth is. So truth is an experience. Truth is also relative. Like in the world, truth becomes something that we know by comparison. And that's why we're talking about what can we learn from lies. That presumes that everything that isn't the truth, with a capital T, is some relative truth. In other words, it's not truth. It's a lie. It's an illusion. It's a falsehood. These terms are used throughout the literature to express the challenging nature of the world that we live in and understanding it. Even in our own declaration, which was read just a few minutes ago, it said that one of our goals is a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. Notice it doesn't say a true realization of the self. It says a truer, right? It's relative. It's progressive. We're moving towards truth. We're not trying to achieve truth. It's not an achievable thing in a manifested existence. It's something that requires constant comparison. This is true. This is truer. And something else might be the truest of the things that you're considering. True, also, in that sense, might mean one's aim. Like his arrow was true, right? It means that your intention, the aim, the purpose, right? These words, again, are used in the declaration, are true, meaning we are rightly aligned with the philosophy and intending to reach our target. This recalls Mr. Judge's analogy of the person aiming the arrow, the archer, and the target. He called it hit the mark. We need to aim high in order to not fall short of the target. And this is certainly true in the case of understanding the world around us and how the falsehoods, the illusions, the lies that exist everywhere can actually teach us something. And this is connected to the relative nature of truth. So, for example, we have this idea of metaphor, right, where we talk about one thing in terms of another. There's a saying that you don't truly understand a subject unless you can explain it to a child. And this subject came up yesterday, completely unrelated to this, the preparation for this talk. But as we started to discuss it, it seemed like it really was a very relevant coincidence, I suppose. And that is, she simply asked, "What is metaphor? What you're saying, metaphorical? What does that mean?" And to be sure I was speaking correctly, we looked it up. We talked about a metaphor versus a simile and some of the grammatical mechanics of those things, which are not relevant here. But the point is that if we say, oh, she's grown so much, and someone else says, yeah, she's growing like a weed, right? She's not actually growing like a weed. It has nothing to do with a weed. There's no plant here involved, right? It's a metaphor. Technically, it's a simile because we use like or as, but similes are metaphors in that sense. So we can extend the metaphor and say, yeah, all I do is water her, and she gets bigger. So it's not actually true, right? This is not accurate. She's not growing like a weed. Only weeds grow like weeds, right? It's the shared experience that attaches us to the truth. We gain our connection to it from what weeds do that children also do, right? They both grow fast. So the experience of these things, not the weed's experience, the child's experience, but the person's, the observer's experience of weeds growing fast or of children growing fast, we can find truth and correspondence in that. This is true even, or this is the case even when it's a person who has never done any gardening at all. This could be a person who grew up in a city and has never seen weeds. But they have heard the expression, and they understand the intent behind it. They understand the meaning, the idiomatic nature of it. Still has truth that we can use in other contexts. Context is critical to understanding the truth of a situation, right? Even tone, right? We can use the same words, but if we change our tone, the meaning is reversed. If I say, oh, I'm glad you're here, there seems to be some genuine appreciation for the person's presence. But if I say, oh, glad you're here, it means something completely different. Identical words, but one says that it's good, and the other says that it's bad. So truth is not just the words that are written down, it's the context around them and the ideas behind them. So you can see that if we're moving around and we're moving behind, it's very difficult to come directly at truth. This is discussed in a short passage in the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll reference a couple of translations. One is Edwin Arnold's Song Celestial, and the other is Mr. Judge's translation of the Gita. And I'm going to draw a diagram because I think it will help us understand it. It's also in reference to, elsewhere in the Gita is discussed the concept of the three qualities of nature, or sometimes called gunas, where there's Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and these three qualities can help us understand. They lend kind of categorical distinction between different types of anything can be characterized in terms of these three qualities, including knowing or knowledge or truth. So we know we are in a world of form, right? There's objects everywhere, and they're all different. So let's say we have these three objects, and this represents all of manifestation here in all of its myriad forms, right? There's an infinite number of forms that are all, of their own unique nature, right? So Rajas, so Rajas sees these three different forms and acknowledges that they are separate. But it will also potentially see this essence. At the heart of each object is an essential sameness. Rajas sees that inner quality as characteristic of that object. Sattva doesn't acknowledge the outward form of the object at all. Sattva is looking just at that inward essence. So to know something in the highest way, to find the truth of something, it's to acknowledge that it is at the heart of all of these things the same. There's no distinction between these things other than the illusion, right? Right, there's a square, there's a circle, and all other objects have this illusion form, right? That's what we can learn from lives, right? Is the contrast between this illusion and what is really at the heart of it, right? And Tamas really just sees the forms. It doesn't see that there's any inner truth to them at all. It just sees the one outer shell, the illusion. And Tamas is regarded as as inertia or decay, right? There's no progress being made here. Rajas is regarded as activity and passion and fire, right? And Sattva is transcendence, right? It's the rarefied, most uplifting form of anything, right? So these are the three qualities of nature, the gunas. And well, let's read quickly here what Krishna says about this. It says, know that the wisdom which perceives in all nature one single principle, indivisible and incorrupt, not separate in each object seen, is of the sattva quality. The knowledge which perceives different and manifold principles as present in the world of created beings pertains to rajas, the quality of passion. But that knowledge wholly without value, which is mean, attached to one object alone as if it were the whole, which does not see the true cause of existence, is of the nature of tamas, indifferent and dark. And then in the Arnold translation, perhaps slightly more poetic, there is true knowledge to see one changeless life in all that lives, and in the separate, one inseparable. So seeing the one changeless life, and in the separate, seeing what is inseparable. That these three things here are really just different views of one truth. And he goes on to say, there is imperfect knowledge, that which sees the separate existences apart, and being separate holds them as real. So a rajas quality of knowing is that these are actually separate and real in their separateness. And then there is false knowledge, that which blindly clings to one as if 'twere all, seeking no cause, deprived of light, narrow and dull and dark. Very similar translation there. It's almost more accurate to look at this translation. It's almost more accurate to look at something like that. Tamas really doesn't even extend beyond the one object that it's looking at any one time. It can't conceive of the multitude at all. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about whether the personality reincarnates. We quoted Crosby. He said, this personal idea, he said there wasn't a problem with personalities, that we need those. Those are valuable for us. They're tools that we can use. He said the problem was a personal idea about the personalities. So he said this personal idea is particularly fostered by the present civilization based on samvritti, relative truth, origin of all the world's delusions. To forego and forget personalities means to regard the truth only, right? So this essence at the heart of everything, and its sameness. So again, truth is an experience. Truth is relative, and truth is a relative experience. In the Secret Doctrine, in Volume 1, HVB says, the whole system of ancient cosmogony is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers, whose respective experiences were made to test and verify the traditions and teachings of higher and exalted beings, who watched over the childhood of humanity. For long ages, the wise men passed their lives in learning by checking, testing, and verifying, in every department of nature, the traditions of old, by the independent visions of great adepts. No vision of one adept was accepted till it was checked and confirmed by the visions, so obtained as to stand as independent evidence of other adepts, and by centuries of experiences. This, of course, is the root of the scientific method, right? This idea is reflected from Plato and Aristotle all the way to Stephen Hawking, right? We can't avoid this concept of reproducible results, that we can get at the truth by comparing relative truths. What can we learn from lies, right? It's this idea of the Rashomon play, right? that's Rashomon play. This was originally a movie, and it's a Japanese movie, like a kabuki, very old movie, and we see it in literature and we see it in modern media all the time. A Rashomon play is where a story is told successively through the perspective of each person who experienced it. And what it does for us is it highlights that the experience is different for everyone. And we know this even just from the most basic criminal investigation, right? So there's a bank robbery, and there's 4 people on each street corner, and each of them gives a description of the getaway car. One of them says it was blue, one of them says it was black, one of them says it was red, one of them says it was green. So what color was the car? We can't really know that, right? Everybody's experience is actually contrary to everyone else's. But if they all say that it was a pickup truck, then we can be reasonably sure by comparing their stories that it was a pickup truck. Similarly, in the traditional literature of every religion, there is mention, if not actual doctrine, associated with reincarnation. It may be denied by theologians later in the history of that particular religion, but in the ancient texts, it's everywhere. It's rare to find a religion that doesn't have some kind of mention or application of reincarnation. So it may differ. One religious canon may differ from another in many aspects, but the presence of reincarnation in each suggests we should consider this philosophy. We should consider reincarnation to be a legitimate thing, and learn from that contrast, right? By sort of looking at what's shared. Again, the concept of a metaphor. We're comparing two things that aren't alike in order to find the experience that's shared in both of them to understand where the truth lies. Let's see. In the same section of the Secret Doctrine where we read about the adepts checking generation after generation, she also says the universe is real enough to the conscious beings in it, which are as unreal as it is itself. Meaning, the universe is unreal, and the beings in it are unreal. We are, in fact, all illusions. But because of the relative nature of their unreality, they are real to each other, right? So this is what is meant by what can be learned from lies, right? What can be learned from the unreal? What can we get out of this world of illusion? Well, a lot, because we're operating at a resonant frequency that corresponds to that same level of unreality. It's like school, right? School, a classroom, is not real life. It's a version of real life. It's preparation for real life. It's really a highly contrived set of circumstances where you're given some lessons and knowledge in order to prepare you for a whole lifetime of experience after you get out of school. There's the image, I think I actually have a copy of it here. It's a painting by Magritte called The Treachery of Images. And his point, of course, is that images are deceiving. Sorry, I have it here. It's a very famous painting. You may have seen it, you may not have. So, right, it's a what is it?
Pipe.
It's a pipe, right? And the caption here in French says, "This is not a pipe." And he calls it the treachery of images, because it's a picture of a pipe. You can't smoke it, right? You can't actually put tobacco in it. It's not going to work any more than you can, run water through this piece of paper. This is also not a pipe, right? It's just ink on paper. It's a symbol. It's a version of a pipe, like school is a version of reality. We can learn about pipes from this, but until you've held one in your hand, you might not know, is that life size? Is that an enlargement? Is this the size of a streetcar? Like, we don't really know, right? There's too much unanswered here that experience has to fill in before we can really understand the truth of it. And even then, it's just truth as it's manifested, right? There is an archetype, there's a paradigm of what it is to be a pipe, right, that exists on, higher levels of the astral. It's a blueprint for, it's the causal world for what we have, manifested here, but without the, without our inner vision attuned to that plane, we can't really see the true pipe nature, if you will. There's another example of this. This is similar to the Rashomon concept. This is the 5 blind men. Sometimes it's 6, and the elephant, right? So they're blind and they're exposed to this elephant, and they each go up to a different part of it. The one is feeling the trunk, and he says, I know elephants. Elephants are like ropes or like snakes, right? Another one feels the ear and says, I know an elephant. Elephants are like fans. One is up to the side of the elephant and says, elephants are like walls, right? And another one feels its leg and says, elephants are like trees, right? And none of them are wrong. Everything they said was true. An elephant is like all of these things. But do they understand the essence of an elephant, right? And even if you explained it to them, right, they can't look at it from afar and see all of it together. In time, of course, you could walk them around it and say, this is part of it, stay on it, yep, this is another part. You could get them, but the point here is, it's a metaphor, obviously, and it's a metaphor powerful enough that people build statues and monuments to the idea. Is everybody's experience is subjective, right? The objective truth is a very difficult thing to find. And it's only by comparing our experience, like the 5 blind men discussing this, okay, maybe the rope connects to something near the fan leads us to the wall leads us to the tree leads us to its tail, which is the rope, etc. So we have to be wary of perspective. There's a book over here called The Holographic Paradigm, and in that book it talks about how a hologram, the way they're constructed, right, it's like a piece of paper, it's a special printing process where with a single source of light you actually see a 3-dimensional image. There's no glasses required or anything like that. Your own eyes see a 3-dimensional image. And if you, say it's an image of an apple, if you cut that into 4s, down the middle and down the middle, and then you would have actually 4 pictures of an apple. Like, you're not going to have like a half an apple on this one or a quarter of an apple on each square. You're going to have a full apple on each of these 4 pieces of paper, right? Cut them again, each one of those into 4s, and now you have 16 smaller apples, because contained, it's like our DNA, right? Contained in each sort of pixel, essentially, or each element of the material is the entire picture of the apple. So that no matter how you divide it up, it's still whole. This represents, like that diagram, no matter how you reflect that essential truth of everything, the one self of all, into the various different forms and objects and materials in the world, no matter how you reflect that, it's unchanged. It's whole in each of those objects, because it never really left. It's connected. It's one with that essential truth. In the same book, it tries to explain this idea again as, in terms of our relative perspective on things, like a goldfish tank, right? Where there's a fish swimming in this tank with a camera looking in the front of the tank and a camera looking in the side of the tank. And this is showing on monitors in two separate rooms. So no one's seeing the actual fish, right? They're just seeing a view of it. And one of them describes the fish and can draw a perfect side view of the fish, and another one can describe the fish and draw a perfect front-on view of the fish. If they compare their drawings, and they can even like sync up the timing, like, okay, so at this moment, I'm looking at it right now, here's my description of it, their drawings will always disagree with each other. And they'll never believe that they're looking at the same fish because they're just looking at different sides of it. There's just to have that 360-degree perspective on something is essentially the challenge of truth. Again, because truth is relative. Truth is an experience. Let's see. Anything else we want to hit on before we open up the floor here? This is probably good. It's probably important to talk about the importance of truth, like why we need it, why if everything is an illusion, if everything is just lies in a sense, or falsehoods, what's the point then? And we have a quote from Gandhi that, as Gandhi is able to do very often, like synthesizes this really well. Of course, his autobiography is called My Experiments in Truth. And in the very beginning he says, "For me, truth is the sovereign principle, which includes numerous other principles. The truth is not only truthfulness in word, but truthfulness in thought also, and not only the relative truth of our conception, but the absolute truth, the eternal principle, that is God. There are innumerable definitions of God, because his manifestations are innumerable. They overwhelm me with wonder and awe, and for a moment stun me. But I worship God as truth only. I have not yet found him. I am seeking after him. I am prepared to sacrifice the things dearest to me in pursuit of this quest. Even if the sacrifice demanded be my very life, I hope I may be prepared to give it. But as long as I have not realized this absolute truth, so long must I hold by the relative truth as I have conceived it. The relative truth must meanwhile be my beacon, my shield and buckler. Though the path is straight and narrow and sharp as the razor's edge, for me it has been the quickest and easiest. Even my Himalayan blunders have seemed trifling to me because I have kept strictly to this path. For the path has saved me from coming to grief, and I have gone forward according to my light. Often in my progress I have had faint glimpses of the absolute truth, God, and daily the conviction is growing upon me that he alone is real and all else is unreal." With that, let's spend the last few minutes with thoughts and comments, questions. Sorry, I think you saw your hand first.
Out of curiosity, and I want to clarify that I probably won't remember correctly the quote, but Jiddu Krishnamurti had a renowned phrase where he used to say that the moment one starts or aims to search for the truth, it ceases to be the truth. It's something like that. Okay. Truth is something that analog to standing on where you don't think where am I standing on, but a lot of people do think what's the goal, where am I going. That the moment one person seeks to search for the truth, it ceases to be the truth. There's a lot more depth to that thought that I myself cannot recollect very well. I'm curious if you're familiar or know what that alludes to, and if you could maybe tie it into the topic. The very interesting topic that I can tell you I'm really fascinated. I really like today's talk.
Okay, thank you. Well, sure. The idea I'm not personally familiar with the quote, although I think I may know where he's going, like what the point is there. Did you have something to add? Oh, okay, the actual quote. Great,
think
that's
so.
perfect.
I maintain that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. That is my point of view, and I adhere to that absolutely and unconditionally. Truth being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized, nor should any organization be formed to lead or to coerce people along any particular path. If you first understand that, then you will see how impossible it is to organize a belief. A belief is purely an individual matter, and you cannot and must not organize it. If you do, it becomes dead, crystallized. It becomes a creed, a sect, a religion, to be imposed on others. This is what everyone throughout the world is attempting to do. Truth is narrowed down and made a plaything for those who are weak, for those who are only momentarily discontented. Truth cannot be brought down, rather the individual must make the effort to ascend to it. You cannot bring the mountaintop to the valley. If you would attain to the mountaintop, you must pass through the valley, climb the steeps, unafraid of the dangerous precipices. And it goes on.
Okay, yeah, that's a fascinating quote. It's it isn't, because it's not HBB Judge Crosby. It's not really considered part of the canon of the United Lodge of Theosophists platform. However, it does speak volumes to what we are trying to say here. It also seems to be somewhat inherently contradictory, because in the beginning he says it's absolutely unattainable, and at the end he says it's like a mountaintop, right? And you have to climb to get there, and it's this dangerous precipice. It's like, well, which is it? I mean, if the beginning sounds somewhat nihilistic, like don't even bother. It's all just, illusion, or it's just the one absolute truth, which if you try to capture it in any way at all, diminishes it, right? It brings it into the personal, the concretized, the mortal, the dying. And this is perhaps what we were talking about with a sattvic vision of knowing, as is described in the Gita, is his mountaintop, right? It's difficult to get to that mountaintop, but not impossible. And it certainly should be the daily endeavor of every seeker after, truth, is to work at it and try to reach it. But it's true. You won't get there with your lower mind. You won't get there with your body. You won't get there with sentiment or banality. You'll only get there through meditation, through the highest levels of concentration. The whole of Patanjali's aphorisms begins with the modifications of the mind, right? And this is that, not that our mind modifies things, but that things modify our mind. As soon as I think about the marker, my mind actually changes in order to conceptualize the marker. Moving past these objects to the essential nature of it still happens within that rajasic condition. It's only in the sattvic condition that we lose the form entirely, and our conception is at the level of the mountaintop, which I think is what's being referenced there. But again, not having heard the quote before, I'm sure we could all, derive some benefit from reflecting on it. But initially, it does seem like yes, there is this danger that we mistake relative truth for absolute truth. And yeah.
No, just while I'm passing the mic up here, you said absolute truth. There is absolute truth. This is this student's understanding of what the Gita says, and the three qualities. We bring them down to try to understand. And when you do that, then it becomes relative truth. But there's a quality which is above even sattvic, because when you can imagine all of those things, then you have approached absolute truth.
So there's, the three qualities are sattva, rajas, and tamas, and then there's, sorry, that's an R. Pardon my handwriting. is nirguna, meaning without quality, right? So this is what you're talking about. And absolute truth certainly does not exist even at the sattvic level. It's just kind of our conceptualization of it, our realization of it in our own mental capacity. As high and rarefied as that is, if it is truly still sattvic, it is still part of manifestation. Right? This is all manifest. And we are told in the philosophy that we need to transcend these three qualities. The other way where it's referenced, we need to transcend the pairs of opposites, you know, good and bad, hot and cold, pleasure and pain, etc. So we do need to get to that point. So yes, there is an absolute truth. There is the absolute truth. Even to just put it in those terms, though, betrays its essential nature. And so because we're trying to ratiocinate, you know, as the philosophy uses that word, and immediately it loses. And that's, I think, the point of that original quote.
The relative truth is of this earth.
Agreed.
And the mind is in charge of those qualities, because
Right.
whether it is thought, feeling, or will, it pulls it to those three qualities.
Yes.
But if the mind, the lower mind, according to this, and I'm going to read it to all of you, is made non-interfering. In other words, you can make it stationary.
Right.
And allow the divine mind to come in and control, then she says, only then can you reach the absolute truth. Here, I will read it. She says, even to reach relative truth, she calls it the sun of truth on earth, we can assimilate its warmest and most direct rays, however differentiated they may become in their long journey through the physical particles of space, because your talk is totally addressing that aspect of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Then at the bottom she says, the animal man in us may make room for the spiritual if it is quietened, and once aroused from its latent state, the highest spiritual senses and perceptions grow in us in proportion and develop pari passu with the divine man. And without that fact being energized, we cannot get to the absolute truth. And here she says, absolute truth is the symbol of eternity, and no finite mind can ever grasp the eternal. Hence, no truth in its fullness can ever dawn upon it. So, the paradox is the mind again, the lower mind versus the higher mind. Depending which one is functional, you're either going to be perceiving relative truth or the absolute truth. And she specifically says absolute truth is not all earth. It belongs to higher realms. And we cannot get to it with our physical mind, so we need
Agreed.
the divine mind.
Mind is going to be like that pivot point between the two, right? And we, as was discussed, you know, when we talk about the personality 2 weeks ago, you know, it's either the master of the lower and servant of the higher, or simply the servant of the lower, and has no connection to the higher. So we want to transcend, you know, the personality and elevate the monastic principle, the mind principle, to be
The individuality.
to be the individuality.
Because
Absolutely.
until you
Right.
become one with
All
that,
of this is the how. I'm really just describing here the what. We're just talking about what is truth, what is the relative perspectives on truth as described in the Gita. So we're not, I don't think we're talking about two different things.
I think to uplift us or keep us uplifted, we need to understand that thou art that. Okay?
Absolutely.
And
No pun
be
intended.
conscious, if you will, that small voice
Yeah.
that is never wrong is always there. Now
The
we
voice
can
of the
shut it
silence.
out, but it's there. So the real truth is there.
That thou
It's
art.
divine. And we have to reach up and grab it.
Right. Yeah.
If
I
we
mean,
can
the
even
challenge-
say that, you know.
You could say the challenge in the simplest terms. The challenge I'm trying to use the microphone. The challenge in the simplest terms is to realize and to remember that thou art. Right?
Without that, you can't get to the real truth, because
Right.
she says that we're not to look at appearances, because that's not reality, but to its intrinsic value.
When it gets down to you, yeah, right.
If you really don't know what truth is, you would not be able to tell the lie either.
Okay.
You can learn something from a lie, it is stated, it's true, but if you do not have something to compare it to that lie, how would you know that it was a
Exactly.
lie?
Right. That,
So
you,
you have to have true principles to base your statement on, to compare it to what, to you perhaps, or to anyone. Also, the universal principles are
I'll
based
restate
on
it,
truth as close to it as you can come. And without those principles, you, I think, mentioned Aristotle. Aristotle could not understand Plato's philosophy. He dwarfed it in the first place.
Absolutely.
Secondly, the physical world is all that the scientific world is experimenting on. We are seven principles. What happens to the higher principles, where you get
honestly,
closer to the
yeah,
noumena,
I mean,
and you get closer to the reality of things? So you cannot just do the experimentation on this
Right.
earth field and think that it's,
well, yeah.
it's real or
I mean, the
true.
experimentation, never meant to suggest that the experimentation being done by the adepts over generations was the same as the experimentation being done by scientists today. I don't think anyone would make that mistake. It's,
Some might. They might not have any idea.
well, I mean,
But
in,
I think
in
it
in
could
essence,
be
they wouldn't be
because the
wrong,
adepts-
but obviously there's
yeah.
there's more depth to it than that.
The way I understand it, the adepts really check each other. So
As
they
do-
have
as
a
do
much-
scientists.
they
I'm
have
saying that as
very,
a
very
concept.
much higher level of expertise than any scientist this student has ever heard of.
Of course,
their
of
body.
course.
So,
I have my own perception of truth.
Mhm.
We all have our own perception of truth. So,
Well, and there's value in that perception, even though it's false. That's essentially one of the themes here. Is that, you know, as she says, you know, it is as. I don't want to misquote. The universe is. Sorry. As unreal as, you know, those beings in it, right? So, it is still what you're talking about is a relative truth. It's still within the plane of manifestation. I mean, you know, we function beautifully with all of these falsehoods, right? I mean, the lectern is not really here. This is not really, none of this, this is all just illusion. This is all just form, right? Creating a functional world for us to live in. These are all the products of our thoughts, right? Crosby says we are reality assigning agents, right? We give these things reality. They don't have an objective external reality. It's all within our minds, within the creative capacity of mental activity. And thus, relatively true. That's useful. We can work with that. But as the previous student mentioned, it's through that contrast that we understand, you know, truths of any kind, right, including absolute truth. Only through our higher natures, only really through buddhi manas that we can actually achieve anything like an understanding of absolute truth. But that's that, you know, razor sharp peak of the mountain. It's a long climb to get up there, and it's full of blinds and falsehoods and distractions all along the way. Essentially, what can be captured, you know, a little bit here, and how is captured in all of these hundreds of books and pamphlets and ideas that, you know, float in and out of this room, you know, every week. And that's the real challenge. That's the real challenge of truth, knowing that thou art.
As
Anyway.
long as you do not accept or constantly remind yourself that the other can express itself.
Right.
So you're trying to quieten the other, so you are that. If you assume that position, you can never go wrong, because that's that little voice in the head that
Right.
says, hey, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Don't go this way. But most of the time people say, it was there, but I just didn't listen.
Right.
I
It's
went ahead and did
oftentimes
what I wanted to do.
oftentimes it's a matter of stripping away veils, right? Talking about what you aren't, like the verse that you're often quoting, I'm not this body and this brain, I'm not these subtle vestures, I am not these emotions and thoughts. What's left?
But-
That.
Yeah.
But I have a little poem
Oh,
here. if I may
wonderful.
quote. What is truth? Truth is the voice of nature and of time. Truth is a startling monitor within us. Naught is without it. It comes from the stars, the golden sun, and every breeze that blows. Thompson Bacon.
And to echo that, I'm going to stop questions and just read one quote here from Crosby, which is how I intended to end. We are here for a great purpose. A great mission lies before every one of us, as well as a great knowledge. We are here as knowing, self-conscious beings, buried in and identified with this body, with this matter. Involved in the very work we had to do on this plane of being, we have forgotten our own true natures. It behooves us to understand what our true nature is and to think and act in accordance with it. Let us remember, too, that the true nature is not far away. It is right within us, within our hearts. In the silence of our own hearts, there pulsates that one life, which beats in correspondence, in the action of the lungs, in the action of the tides, and in the flux and reflux, which is going on all the time and everywhere in nature. With that, we conclude.